Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Better Body Radio. And today we are joined by Matt Peacock, a father, fellow Scot, of course, and an international online coach who helps men optimize their muscle, mindset, and metabolism. He's helped thousands of men completely turn around their health and mindset to achieve all types of fitness and body composition goals. And he's been able to do this as he's been there himself. But not only that, Matt lives as he preaches, walking the walk consistently, week upon week, day upon day. I first came across Matt through a mutual connection at the time, and maybe still now. I don't know if you still work with Cal or not, Matt, as we were both being coached by Callum Reistrick at the time, and I still am as well. I had a little nosy at his profile at the time, and I really appreciated what he was doing, how he conducted himself, and just how he was communicating his message as well. So after connecting with Matt on Instagram, I saw it as a very opportune time to get him on the podcast, and so here we are. So without further ado, Matt, welcome to Better Body Radio.
Thanks for having me, mate. I think after that introduction, that's the best one I've ever had. Can I ask one favour? That is, if I die before you, can you speak at my funeral? Because something like that would be absolutely perfect. Thanks, mate.
I'll be there. Just let me know the approximate day. Just put me on your
that was quite the intro. Thanks very much.
Next of kin. Just get that Ross Gilmore guy. He can go. So should we dive in question number one? Or is there anything I'm missing from your intro that you'd like to add?
Oh, fight back the sarcasm, Matt. No, I'm good. Well, I'll keep any dry Scottish humour for later on. I think it's too early. Let's just go with the questions for now.
I think we would get going with question one because you'll have plenty of chance to get that all in there. So I understand, prior to getting to fully online, that you were an in-person coach for quite some time, and then you switched to fully online. So can you just tell the listeners a bit about your backstory in the industry and how you kind of, developed towards where you are now as an online coach?
Of course, mate. So as we literally just chatted about off air, I spent a decade working in consultant engineering, which was fantastic. Traveled around the world, got paid relatively well, and I enjoyed it. I had an interest in architecture, so it was something that it kind of ticked a lot of boxes, but it didn't scratch the itch of like there was something missing. Mm-hmm. So 10 years later, various appointments around the world, I just decided, right, I actually just left with absolutely zero plan, other than the fact that I had in every office I had ever worked in, I had been the fitness guy. I was like the unofficial PT to every office, that I would run at lunchtime, or I would train at lunch, or I would train before work. And you'll remember from corporate life, your pedestal unit that has like a filing cabinet in it. Mm-hmm. I ripped the filing cabinet out and put like a 5 kilo bag of protein. So like I was that guy in every office. And I just basically was giving out free fitness advice. Wasn't in any way qualified to do so, but it was a kind of an insight into something that I really wanted to do. So after quitting, I went and did my level 2 and 3, and just literally signed up in the gym. Like walked into a gym and was like, a private gym, I want to pay rent. Let's get this party started. And I had absolutely zero idea how to get leads or any of that. But I put on my LinkedIn at the time that I had moved to be doing this. And a lot of my old corporate mates had turned around and been like, oh, well, actually, if I can pay you for this now, 100% I'm in. And I went from like week 1, probably week 4, I was delivering 40 sessions a week. I was just like, this has gone crazy, but I mean, great. Embraced it, enjoyed the face-to-face, and it was really good fun. And I think it was something that I learned a lot. I learned a heap, but I was delivering 40 sessions a week for multiple years. And after a while, I thought, this online's going to be pretty interesting. And actually, Callum, that you mentioned in the intro, Callum was coaching me at the same time as he was coaching you back in the day. That was like my first kind of insight into being on the receiving end of online coaching, which was an interesting insight. And I really, really enjoyed it. So then I figured I put out a call for sort of beta testers, if you like, and just said, look, I'm going to take on a couple of online clients. I'm going to take on 3 people. I'm not going to charge you much. I wanted to do this for myself. And I ran that. They came on board, was really successful, and I'll be honest, mate, it just snowballed. It went from 3 beta testing clients to 70 online clients in the space of a year and a half, and it's just stabilized and stayed there. And the process has developed, the systems have developed, and I've continued to grow it. And I think the number one driving factor in that entire anecdote has been the mindset or the requirement for CPD that was hammered into me in the construction industry. So in the construction industry, it's not a discussion. You do CPD or you lose your accreditation and you wouldn't be able to do your job. So I hated it at the time because it felt like a gun to my head and it was something that I didn't really love. I carried it on anyway. But then when I was doing a job that I loved and learning about things that I really enjoyed, I just relished it. And I don't even, I've not got the numbers. I probably don't want to know what I've spent on CPD in the last 6 years. And I would spend it all again twice, because I've made connections with people in the industry. I've learned so much. And I think that is what's allowed me to progress at the like blistering rate that seems to be happening. I hope that answers that question.
100%. It's funny though, like with the whole, any good coach that I ever speak to and ask them about, like, you know, how much money do you reckon you've spent on education? And most of them can't tell you, because they've just been so passionate about just like, I just want to, you almost can't learn enough, can you? It's like you go from being in a job that you absolutely hate to, I can't do enough CPDs, but like Luke Lehman often talks about, you obviously don't want to become a certification slut either. And you want to make sure that you're actually applying the knowledge that you learn as well, because that's also unfortunately something that a lot of coaches fall prey to, which is just, well, how many courses and get under my belt and say, well, look, I did this and that makes me really good. It's like, no, it's what you can do with that and apply it that makes you really good on the other side of it. So I just wanted to, just a complete side question. What's been the biggest thing that you've gotten from going fully online versus being in person? Like, what's been the biggest enrichment to your lifestyle, would you say?
To my personal lifestyle is Matt Peacock. So taking the muscle mindset coach hat off and putting the Matt Peacock hat on, without question, has been like the freedom to, like, I'm big on like putting my phone down and just getting outside. Like, I just have been switched off. So anybody that watches my story for any amount of time will notice I basically live in the sea, like part amphibian these days. So I literally just go down to the sea. Like, that control to be able to do that, to be able to get out of bed at 5 and be in the sea at past, and just kind of splash around like an idiot in the sea, like literally just lie in the sea floating, watch the sun come up, is, I cannot emphasize the life-changing magic of that. And then not having to like rush back because I've got clients at a certain time, because obviously the nature of online, as you will know, is there's no fixed times, there's deadlines by which things have to be delivered, but it's not like you have a client at 9 a.m. So that freedom to run my diary and my life in order to, and this is very, very important to how I coach, so slightly putting the muscle mindset coach hat back on, I talk to my clients about drains and charges, about making sure that their personal charges outweigh their personal drains. And I, as coaches, we are the worst, in my experience, at just draining yourself dry. Pouring yourself into clients, helping them out. And I definitely did that initially when I was trying to do the hybrid thing. I was running myself ragged. So the beauty of going fully online meant that I could prioritize and program charges, i.e. getting in the sea, or taking the dog a walk, or just going for a run in the middle of the day. And I absolutely thrive on it.
That's absolutely brilliant. And, you know, I think, like you said, you brought up a couple of things there, and we'll get to this kind of later, because it's part of one of the questions I've got for you, the whole winning the first battle juggernaut that is essentially accumulating. I think like anyone who's kind of studied broader than just like calories in, calories out, and a bit of exercise understands the importance of things like getting natural sunlight exposure, you know, understanding your circadian architecture and hygiene and all those things. And I think, like you said, that when you start putting those sort of things first, it's amazing what that does to your overall quality of life. So it's kind of, yeah, it's really cool to hear you talk about how that's directly impacted you, muscle mindset but it's also going to help you when you do put the muscle mindset coach hat on as well, right? That's the big thing. So
yeah, it feeds both ways. Yeah 100%.
Exactly. I mean, I'm in a position where, I mean, you said I kind of partly know what you mean with the online stuff, because I am hybrid at the moment. I do a lot of in person. I'm probably still doing about 25 hours a week in person, but I'm also managing around 15 to 20 clients online as well. So I think I'm going to be very interested in the plan in the future is to kind of step away from the in person and eventually just do purely education and online. So I'm not quite where you are yet in the terms of understanding the full feeling of what that's like not to have set appointments, timeframes. But I can just imagine that it's just this huge, kind of just flow of freedom that you get back for yourself.
100%. Even just like the stuff, I did a post recently about make the little things big. Even just the little things that sometimes you forget about. So case in point, Scotland's 24-hour summer happened 2 days ago, and whilst summer was happening, if you remember well, I'm sure. I mean, it's been a long time, but like when that one day of summer comes round in Scotland, I used to resent beyond words being in the gym.
Yeah,
like you're like in with clients. I can't take these clients outside. I can't take the squat rack outside, and I'm now like, I've got 15 clients and it's going to be bloody dark by the time I'm finished. That used to piss me off. I used to resent it. So it's now I take the laptop, I sit in the back garden with my top off, get a heap of sun, look after my circadian rhythm, look after my personal well-being, and work concurrently. I think sometimes I genuinely have to have a pinch me moment, like, and I kind of like snap back into reality. Like, I largely work standing in my slippers, mate, and I love my job, and I'm really, really happy with my life. I'm like, there's no reason for me to be grumpy, despite being, other than being Scottish, I suppose, because it's inherently built into us, I think.
Yeah, we just have to be able to learn to bury that bad boy away every now and then. It's like, no, you know. I think tired and hungry is the recipe for being a grumpy Scotsman, that's for sure.
Yeah, 100%.
So let's dive into a bit about what you are absolutely brilliant at and what you live for, which is helping men optimize muscle, mindset, metabolism. That's kind of the tagline that you use, and it's kind of a big part of your, it's literally kind of, I suppose, those 3-pronged words that kind of summarize what you do with your business. I want to hone in on the mindset component specifically, since any coach who's been doing this any length of time, I mean, I don't know how long you've been coaching clients for. For me, it's been just around about a decade. I'm sure you're probably close to that somewhere as well.
6 years, mate. 6 years.
Cheers. So, I mean, anyone who's been doing any length of time with any level of depth to what they're doing. Because there's one thing, you could be in the industry 20 years and have very little depth to what you do. But you can also be in the industry 6 years and have had a hugely rich experience as well. So for anyone who's been in the industry a long time, we understand just how integral this whole mindset aspect is to ensuring client success. What would you say are the kind of tools and strategies that you utilize most to get, you know, to help your clients foster and bulletproof mindset that you talk so much about?
Yeah, for sure. So irrespective of the actual specific client journey, the direction of that journey, because naturally all of them are mutually exclusive, the core fundamentals of that actually all are the same in many respects. So irrespective of whether you have somebody who's severely overweight or somebody who's comp prepping or somebody who wants to build muscle, actually in my experience, in every single case, the baseline, the basal stuff is mindset. So it's the first thing that we work on with every single client. And I think for me, it's getting the client to respect and understand that there's going to have to be an identity shift. And this is something that I talk to all my clients about, is that the reason why, I mean, the problem with these conversations is they often devolve into like a fat loss specific chat, and I don't want it to become that, but it's often most graspable for the listener in terms of fat loss is like 99% of people's goal. Like, yeah, sure, we want to get jacked, but let's get lean first. But having that identity shift the way I make this tangible and accessible to clients is I want them to imagine like a miniature version of them on their right shoulder and a miniature version of them on their left shoulder. Now, the right shoulder, that's the old version, and he's got 30 years and they're running in a presidential candidate debate, right? They're running in a race. And this wee guy on the right, he's got, let's say the client's 30 years old. There's 3 decades of successful wins. He's won. He's had all these votes put in his ballot. This guy, he's new on the scene, bit of an underdog. Everyone loves an underdog, but he's not got any votes. And every decision that you make throughout the day, from the minute, and inclusive of the minute you wake up, you will get onto that. Every decision that you make throughout the course of the day is you deciding which one is polar, which one of you, whose ballot box are you putting the vote in, because this guy got you in the state you're in, and that is either good, bad, indifferent. Regardless, if you're listening, you probably want to change something. So he's got some negative qualities. This guy's all the good stuff that you're working towards, and it takes a lot more effort to put a vote in his ballot box. And I just get my guys to think about, like, where have you cast your votes today? In the last hour, where have you cast your votes? Because in my experience, decisions are largely binary, like sofa or workout, pizza or prep meal, coffee or water. You know, they're binary. They're not often multifaceted, and by that nature, I think people understand the analogy of someone on each shoulder. So I get them to work through that identity thing, whereby the stronger we can cast votes for the new guy, the more that becomes your identity, and the more you actually start to align yourself with that guy. And it's just becomes so tangible for clients, that analogy that I give them in week 1 of their coaching, irrespective of who they are. It's like, you need to cast votes for him. And then on top of that, combining in the atomic habits approach. So the whole James Clear thing, where it's just like, this whole thing doesn't need to be this complicated. Let's actually boil down the task at hand into the smallest, most pragmatic. We've discussed pragmatism off air already as well, but what can we break it down to in its finest parts that involve those pieces casting votes by default for this new guy. And when we push those two things together, we've got this granular approach to understanding the nuts and bolts of the machine and understanding which of these guys is a bit of a dickhead and which of these guys is the guy you want to cast votes for. And when you understand that, that for me almost makes you unstoppable in the pursuit of your progress, irrespective of the goal.
Brilliant. Yeah, it's such a great, and I'm a very visual person, so that sits very well in my mind, how to visualize how that works. And I think one phrase I often use with a lot of my clients, and I love the fact that you kind of then finished off with the idea of making things like, make this something that's actually tangible to do, that you can physically take an action on, because so many people want to major in the minors. They want to, let's look at all the little granular gray stuff that I can kind of optimize and tweak, when the reality is, if you're not really nailing the big rocks, you're not going to optimize anything. You have to nail those big rocks. No. Sure, don't get me wrong, like people often say, oh, but I want to look outside of energy balance, but still, for example, energy balance still matters. But then if you're not doing that, well, let's get that right first. But then once you do get that right, yes, there's plenty beyond that for sure. But you have to earn that. Yeah. I think that's great. I like that analogy of the little guys on the shoulder, and everyone loves an underdog story, and it's great when that guy wins as well.
100%. And I get my guys to like almost cartoonize them, make them stupid. So see the old guy, make him this big fat version of you that you're like, you wouldn't ever want, like the worst case scenario you could ever imagine yourself in. Make this guy like the best case scenario, like literally give them the outward traits of what their behaviors would manifest. And I think that makes it even more visual and even more powerful. So there's this like, not necessarily shredded, I think that's where people go, but think about like really, really, really healthy, well-being driven version of you who's not going to get high blood pressure or diabetes or have a heart attack, and who is potentially lean and healthy and fit and happy and mentally stable. And this guy is sedentary, unhappy, mentally unhappy, relatively unwell in multiple ways. And if you have that visual representation, I think it is really powerful. And I think like the next analogy that I kind of throw into the back of that, once the client's got a grip of that, is it's actually a model that I stole from James Clear, and it's like the simplest thing in the whole world, but it just makes something instantly tangible. So it's, if we think of a target, we've got three circles within each other. And what people do is we've got three circles. So we've got on the outside, we've got outcomes, then we've got processes, and then we've got identity. So what people do is they come up with the outcome. So you say to the client, what do you want to do? Lose weight. Okay, be a bit more specific. I want to lose 10 kilos. Sweet. That's the outcome. The client, left to their own devices, is next going to boil that down into a series of processes. So they're going to say, in order to achieve the outcome, to lose the 10 kilos, I must go to the gym. And I mean, usually the outcome is something like, the process is something along the lines of go to the gym 9 days a week and eat like a 5-year-old girl. And then they're like, oh, I'll lose weight. It's like, but being serious, like, go to the gym and eat a bit less. That's what people understand. That's their process. But that doesn't then go on to impact the identity, which is the core, the bullseye of the target. Mm. That doesn't necessarily often bleed in. In fact, in my experience, it almost never bleeds in. Yeah. But if we flip that model and we start with the bullseye and we say, right, cool, these two guys, they're your identity. Let's start casting votes for this guy, the healthy guy, and let's get rid of the dickhead. And once we get that running and we've got your identity moving, that identity makes it easier. Because if you start to think, like, what would that guy do in every situation? And I ask my clients, I'm like, they're more than welcome to use me. Like, how would Matt behave in this situation? They don't have to, but like, if that helps them grasp this, how would Matt behave? What would Matt choose? If they start to behave congruently with how they believe that person would behave, then that will, by default and inherently, change their processes, because their processes are now in line with an idealistic behavior, which will by default get the outcome, which for me is a far more sensible approach to the whole thing. So the takeaway in that is, don't start with outcomes, or at least identify your outcomes, but then go back and start dealing with identity. And if you do that, it bleeds out. It doesn't necessarily go the other way.
Definitely is. I'm sure you've read Maxwell Maltz Psycho-Cybernetics, right? Because that's a component of the book, is that it's this idea of identity. Because some people, they change how they look, and that helps them shift that to a degree. And there's other people, they do the work, and it's like, I don't feel any different. The visual part was not even remotely part of their identity. It didn't represent anything of what it was they actually didn't like about themselves.
For sure.
And I think that kind of really relates nicely to Simon Sinek's Start With Why as well, because if you look at the three circles of his book as well, it's like the why, how, and what, right? And so it's kind of like everyone starts with the what, and then he gives that the example of Apple all the time, and it's like we just, by the time you get to the end, it's like we just happen to make computers. Like the what's not even relevant. It's kind of like we do this because we want to challenge the status quo. So like you said, you start from within and you then build outwards. It leads to much more authentic outcomes in line with, like you said, the person you want to become. One point I just wanted to touch on before we move on to the next question is you obviously mentioned about the common example people give of the kind of fat loss goal. But you and I both know from being in this industry for a little bit of time is that it's not necessarily that it's the people who are overweight and lose weight that necessarily have those issues. People who literally the identity is revolved around, if I'm not peeled and I'm not jacked all the time, then my self-worth is out the window. So I think that's just something for a lot of people who may be listening, who maybe they're a bit more advanced, maybe they're coaches themselves. It's not something that's fixed. It's a constant moving target as we evolve as humans. And it doesn't matter whether you're shredded or overweight. Identity is constantly moving and changing, and it's okay to want to change who that person is if you feel like you can be a better version of yourself, I think.
100%. I mean, I in my early 20s, I decided I'd try and put on a gorilla suit and just get as massive as I possibly could. And I figured that was, like you say, the identity I was after. And then I got there and it sucks largely. Like, it's terrible, like truly awful. Actually, I remember going for a game of squash with my dad, and I don't think my heart rate's ever been that high the rest of my life. I was just like immobile and uncomfortable and sweaty and miserable. And I'm like, maybe this isn't the identity that I thought I was trying to acquire. And then I've been on the other end of that and been absolutely peeled. That also sucks. And I think, I don't know if it's an age thing. I think it is. I think I'm approaching a midlife crisis. I feel like as I get older, bigger, wiser, and uglier, my focus moves away from that visual identity and it moves more towards like and I hate this word, and I'm going to caveat it by saying there's a W on the start of it, so it's not the word you think. Holistic with a W, not like holistic yogi. I don't expect you to do this with your fingers and float and hum and bang miniature symbols together, all that stuff. Holistic is in the entirety, like a holistic well-being perspective is how I start. I really view my identity now. And I am smaller and less lean than I've practically ever been as a coach, but I'm happier, I'm fitter, I'm healthier, and I'm actually better able to serve my clients. So yeah, you're right. It's not always a visual thing. I think that people get caught up on that. I think this industry, we make it worse on Instagram as well, let's be honest. I mean, I'm as bad for it. Posted a picture of me the morning of a photo shoot this morning. I caveat, that's what I looked like 6 months ago, and now I look like a melted candle. So just for reference.
But like you said, it's so important to understand that there's layers to this, and there's an intrinsic identity, there's an extrinsic identity, and it's okay to work on either of those components in either direction as well. So like you said, Instagram always is great at providing those snapshots in time. And the thing is that you look probably back on that and you're probably super fond and proud of, right, well, I really appreciate what it took to get there. And I think that's a key point for people as well. It's what you got from the journey to get there was the most important part, not the actual end point in time.
It's the Tony Robbins thing, isn't it? The journey, the journey isn't what you get at the end. It's, who you become to get there. And yeah, 100%. I regularly look back on that, specifically that last photo shoot, and I will look at it and think, yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong, it was rapid and it sucked. But like the thing I look at it with is a pride as a kind of father. Like, I can only imagine if my dad could whip out a photo now and be like, see, when you were 5, like, I was this shredded. What are you saying to that? Like, it would blow my mind. Do you know what I mean? Imagine your dad could like cut out this photo and be like, yep, I was peeled when you were 5. You were at primary 1 and I was absolutely peeled. Like, I can't wait to show Nixon when he's older and be like, here, get your mates round. Your dad was an absolute legend when you were 5. But, but yeah, like you're right. It's who you become, and it's the things that you learn about yourself and about the world, I suppose, along the journey. Like, I learned a lot. Doing that 8-week cut was testing in many respects with being a dad and being self-employed all at the same time. Taught me a lot. And yeah, like you say, it's what you pick up along the way. So yeah, if it's visual your goal, great. If it's not, great. Don't be swayed by what we're saying or what anyone else is saying. Go for your win, right?
Big time. I think that actually that's a brilliant time to transition on to question 3, which is let's move it over to your clients now and put the focus on them, because that's ultimately why we do what we do, right? What are the main challenges you find your clients are struggling with the most and need your help to overcome?
So the identity thing is, like, again, just to reiterate, is like the biggest one. the issue with that is that's the thing that they need the help with that they don't know they need the help with until they join. And then I ram it down their throat and they're like, oh my God, I did not realize this was a problem. And they have the light bulb moment and then it all starts to fall into place. So that's the unconscious. What do they need my help with in a conscious capacity? Most of them have absolutely no idea how to go about measuring and managing their metrics. So it's not necessarily a complex workout issue. It's not necessarily like, let's be honest, if you gave a monkey a calculator, they could probably work out a deficit. And if you give them some dumbbells, I'm sure they could get like something resembling a workout. And I don't genuinely, in my own client base, I don't believe that's their biggest issue. It's part of the problem, but I think what they really need is accountability, a plan, and coaching. So those three things are the three things that I genuinely would say. And I think when they fill out a form and they bring back the data to me, even at that moment in time, let's say they're 1 week into coaching and they present all this data, which is like until this point alien to them. They present it to me and I'm like, right, Ross, tell you what, we'll look here Monday night, really, really poor sleep. Tuesday morning, hellishly high blood sugar. Tuesday, food quality is like a 2. Wednesday, food quality is a 4. Thursday, food quality is back at an 8. So Monday night sleep cost you 2 days of shit food. You've overeaten, you've made terrible decisions on eating, and it's all because of Monday sleep. And then when you give them that joined up, again, integrative kind of coaching style, when you can show them stuff and you're like, look at your blood pressure, these things, when you show that not just like in silos, when you show them it as a one holistic with a W picture, they're like, oh, right, I get this. And now I can act on it to make things better. And I think that ultimately brings me on to like the goal with clients for me is to teach them this stuff so that they can do it for themselves. I'm a big fan of teaching people to fish so they can do it for the rest of their life. Like I don't want to just give you the workouts and be like, oh, slap you on the ass and be like, go get them, Tiger. I want to be like, here's how all the pieces of the puzzle fit together. And see, in 10 years' time, I said this to a client literally yesterday. In 10 years' time, I want you to think back and be like, I wonder what that guy Matt's doing with himself, because I'm still able to recognize that one night's poor sleep is probably going to put me at risk of making poor decisions with my food today. So that for me is a win. That would be my win as the coach for each client.
Brilliant. It's so refreshing to hear that, because I think that's, and I think I said something quite similar to Cassim Hansen, who was on the podcast last, who was our last guest, was because he actually spoke a lot about, and it was a very unexpected tangent, but this idea of making sure you really set expectations. There was nothing I had no question related to that in the podcast, but he just went down this rabbit hole, as most intelligent people tend to do, and talk about expectations and constantly checking in on people. And one phrase that he used, which it very much relates to what you just said, is that the fitness industry is sometimes like, you get people that don't care for a start. So they don't even get to the point you're talking about where they're actually tracking anything or even caring about tracking those things. But say the coaches that are, and we've seen that, listen, like even people like our coach Cal, like people are looking up to him as a coach now and they're thinking, oh, well, must be really cool to track all that data. I need to do that with all my clients as well. But then what happens when you don't know what to do with the data and it's just a bunch of data, and it creates even more overwhelm? And I think that the phrase that Cassim used, which I like, is that we're an industry now that's becoming information heavy but context light. And so I think 100%. What you're doing with your coaching and what we try to do with our coaching is that you, like you said, the connecting the dots, it's the right, we're going to find, we have all this data, we have all this information, but what really matters, what's the context behind all of this? Well, like you said, someone has a poor night's sleep or a couple of bad nights sleep. How does that affect the rest of the week? How does that impact their training performance? How does that affect their stress, their ability to tolerate stress of external situations, all of these things? And it's stuff, like you said, that when you're living within yourself, we're our worst own, we can't, it's very difficult to be objective with yourself, right? Regardless of
for sure.
how aware you are, how in tune you are and all that stuff, or how much of a biohacked individual you are, like try to be self-objective is incredibly difficult to do. And that's why people need like Matt Peacocks and the Ross Gilmores of the world and everything else. So I think that's
100%, mate. I agree with that 100%. I think Luke Lehman nails it when he talks about like having all the data is great, but like having the tools in the toolbox to know how to do that is more important in many respects. So Luke always puts it, I mean, I've heard him say it a million times, like when the only tool you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So it's like, it doesn't matter if you're collecting all the data. If you aren't trained in how to use it, it's not going to be relevant. Equally well, that also ties back to the fact that it's not always relevant or correct or appropriate for every client to be measuring each one of those metrics. Like, I'm going to put it out there, less than half of my clients track fasting blood glucose.
Yeah.
And less than half of that half track fasting blood glucose all the time. It's snapshot stuff and it's relevant to their current phase. So before people listen, like, oh shit, I better go and buy a blood glucose monitor and start jabbing my finger every morning. No, probably not. Let's just calm down and look at what we need to know. And I think it ties back to what you said maybe a couple of minutes ago. You're saying about big rocks when we were talking earlier on. You said about big rocks. You know the analogy with the glass jar, right?
Yes.
Like I use it with my clients. So it's like the professor brings in a jar and puts it on the table and fills it with big rocks. And he says, like, to the class, is it full? And they say, yeah, of course. And he says, right, well, wait a minute. Pulls out a bag of pebbles, which go inside the gaps in the rocks. And he says, is it full? And they say, yes. And then he puts sand in. And is it full? Yes. And then he pulls out a glass of water and pours it in. He's like, now it's full, motherfuckers. And now that's the stuff that people focus on. They focus on the sand and the water, when in reality, and that's your fasting blood glucose. That's your blood pressure, maybe, depending on it's all relative. It's all very specific. But if we can get the big rocks in place, first and foremost with all clients, like you say, like, oh, well, it's more than a calorie deficit. Yes, it is more than a calorie deficit, but that doesn't negate the requirement for a calorie deficit.
Yeah.
So big rocks. And I talk to my clients about that. I literally get them to use the language back to me. Like, what are your big rocks? And what are your pebbles? And what for you is the sand and the water? Because I'll tell you what, it's certainly not the right pre-workout or the type of creatine that you're taking. Relax. Like, do you know what I mean? Fasting blood glucose can wait.
100%. It's funny. I would even say probably my longer term clients who were, I would say, maybe a little less advanced, and some of the people I've taken on more recently are a bit more advanced. So sure, some of those guys are definitely tracking some of those things, but I would even say less than a quarter of my clients even track that stuff. One thing I've been a bit pushy on is just because I know it's something that will just give a big window into their, I was going to say window into their soul, but their autonomic nervous system is like blood pressure. I think most people can handle maybe putting a blood pressure cuff on, but like you said, then is it every day? Is it like a couple of days during the week and one at the weekend? And like you say, it's so individual. And I like this, what I guess I liked about Kassim's brand. I like this idea of the N of one. The N of one approach. Everyone is literally their own N of one. And as much as we have all this research, all this data, you've still got to treat that person as their N of one. So I think it's cool to hear a lot of similar threads coming through, a lot of the great coaches that we're interviewing on here, which will bring me on nicely to question number 4. So this is all threading very nicely together. So I understand that you're more recently started mentoring coaches to help them with building solid foundations with their business. With which areas do you feel that coaches probably need the most help within setting up a successful business?
So that's a recent addition to the business, and it's something that I've kind of gone in very gently into. I've not gone foolhardy. I don't necessarily want to just do that either. Like I absolutely love coaching people, like clients, coaching, not mentoring, coaching. So there's no intention for me to move away from that. So I've taken on a small group and it's been really, really rewarding, like helping people. And in my experience, the biggest issue, and this is the most vague answer ever, and I promise we can dive deeper into it, but the problem on the face of things at the highest possible level answer to that question is systems. Like they just don't have systems. They just are like, when I get a coach on a discovery call for mentoring, it's like, right, sweet. Hi, Ross. Tell me about your problems. How do you run your business just now? And they're like, what do you mean? It's like, well, run me through the client journey from, if I was to phone you right now, what's going to happen? And I'm already sold. You don't need to sell me something. Just assume I want to give you my money. Everything from how am I going to pay you, through to how do I get to know you and your business, through to how do I actually know what to do, and how do I understand like the ethos, ideology, and how do you educate me, if at all? And they just look at you, stare back through the screen, and they're like, well, just send them my bank details. And that's sometimes the length of that answer. And you're like, right, I can't help but like swallow. It's like gulp, right. Well, we've got some work to do, but ultimately none of it's unfuckable. We just need to start to systemize your business to the extent where like the client journey needs to be something that you consider. And I think that's been front and foremost of my own business, is like, I regularly sit down, pen and paper or whiteboard, client outside business, successful client leaving the business. What does that timeline look like? Like, what are the key components in my mind as a coach? And I can't give coaches the answers. I know a lot of mentors will, because it's sometimes easier to do that color by numbers thing, and I'm not against it. but it's just not my vibe. I'm more of a case of, you need to have your own identity and your own integrity. And for an integrity standpoint, you need to come up with these answers. I will show you the path, but you need to walk it. So yes, the systemizing it, even just managing client data. The number of coaches that you're like, even their face-to-face clients, there's no software. You'll know this. Like, we had a discussion off air. There's no capture of client data whatsoever. And I'm not talking GDPR or anything like that. I'm talking about giving a shit about the person who's paying you, actively tracking all of their metrics, their progress in sessions, and what, like, case in point, how many PTs can resonate with this? Is all of them. You're in a session with a client, you've run it, and in the middle of the session, you're like, oh, we'll pick up on that next week because it's not what you're working on right now, but something gets flagged in terms of deadlift techers, or they ask about reverse band and a hack squat. Next week comes around, you haven't written that down anywhere, and they're like, oh, I thought you said we were going to work on that next week, and you're completely forgotten because you're managing 40 people. That's normal. Yeah. Coaches don't track anything, so just giving them the systems and the software and the ability to do that, and in my mind, doing so without spending a fortune, because this is an industry where there is a software for everything for $99 a month. All your wildest dreams will come true, but they won't, because it's shit. And inevitably, you've now got all of your IP built on someone else's land. So teaching clients, my mentoring guys, how to build their house on their own land is key for me, because I've been caught in that trap before, if you will.
No, I hear you 100%. We, if there's one thing that my wife and I spent a lot of time on, definitely in the last 4 to 5 years, systems, and it's something that's built and grown. And we spoke off air, like, you know, we still use everything through Google Sheets, and it's got to a really good point. But I think, like we said as well, technology is moving on. People are going to start gravitating towards apps. But I think one point that's probably important is that, you know, we would, if we had to make the transition to an app, see, because we've ran, like you say, those systems, we've actually got a client journey. We've mapped out what is the Better Body road. We call it our Better Body roadmap, client roadmap.
For sure.
We have like, there's 5 blocks, potential blocks that can be within each coaching cycle. So we call, like, say, a phase of training for someone. It might be like someone comes in and say they're the general person. It might be like, right, they're starting off, they need to lose some body fat, tighten up all of their habits, change their identity of who they are. And by the time they get to the end of cycle 1, they'll have been through what we call like a transform phase, which is a fat loss phase.
Yeah.
Solidify phase, which is a reverse diet phase, and a maintenance phase. Or it might be that they need actually a longer time preparing for that fat loss phase. Or maybe just like, you've been dieting chronically for years. We need to get away from the dieting mindset. We need to build you up to a really good place that, you know, improve your aerobic capacity, as you know the reasons why. We don't need to go into that. And so all these things, right? And then we can pull those building blocks out and say, right, this is what your roadmap looks like. And that's cycle 1. Then once we get there, we could potentially look at a cycle 2, which looks like this. And so you get the idea, like, we've taken so much time to really identify, like, okay, these 5 blocks, what are they? What do they represent? What are the characteristics of, or the numerous characteristics of the individuals who are going to go through that particular. And, you know, if we ever do transition over to an app, that's going to be so much easier, because we really, really understand, like, this is what a client journey is going to look like. And I think, like you said, what I've noticed certainly from being over here in Dubai is the coaches who conduct themselves in a professional way, they've adapted so quickly. The ones who haven't, they're just either starting to leave the industry or they're getting left behind. And so I think for
100%
coaches listening to this, if you're not already got systems in place, get someone like Matt to help you out, because I guarantee you it will save you so much time, hassle, energy, and it will allow you to scale your business way, way quicker than where you're currently at.
100%. I encourage the clients, the mentoring clients rather, to think for themselves. Like, I think as an industry, there's a heap of educational charlatans, and there's a lot of people who will be like, all your wildest dreams will come true if you come to this seminar. And it's like, we'll give you the exact steps. Coaches want exact steps. People want absolutes. That's a fundamental of psychology for all human beings. Polarity is easier to sell. So it's like, if I market, like, and you will never see this on my page in any context, mark my words, but if I was to market coach mentoring, it's like, I will give you the exact system. I'm not going to give you the exact system. I'm going to show you an outline, and I'm going to make you use your brain. See, using the thing that's between your ears to actually come up with your own, like, having some integrity and coming up with who you are as a coach. That's, for me, far more important from a coaching standpoint, is like, what do you believe in fitness? What do you oppose in fitness and well-being? What are your beliefs and oppositions? what do you believe the client journey should look like? And there are often people will be like, oh, well, what do you do? It's like, it doesn't matter what I do just now. I genuinely want to hear your unbiased and unadulterated opinion on how a client journey should look. And coaches are so used to being baby fed and spoon fed answers by idiots in the industry who will sell you dreams for $5,000. Like, I've got a guy who, with all anonymity protected, came on board for coach mentoring, who had paid someone $5,000, I think it was, to build this system. And it was like a plug and play absolute promise. Turned out to be completely useless. That's the level of detail I can give without, so I want to protect his anonymity, but effectively he phoned me up and he's like, well, literally the guy was almost in tears, and I honestly, my heart was breaking, and I'm like, listen, mate, I gave him a quote for helping him out, and it was a fraction of that, like a fraction of that. And he's like, well, for all of it? I'm like, yeah, for all of it. And I'm going to help you come up with your own ideas. And we're going to get away from that horrible system. And mate, we're like 5 weeks into mentoring, and he's texting me off the back of every call being like, mate, this is the best business decision I've ever made, because making him use his own brain to come up with his own ideas, to come up with his own ethos. And I think that is the absolute key to it all for me for mentoring.
Hey guys, Coach Ross here. So that was part 1 with Matt Peacock, the Muscle Mindset Coach. So I hope you guys really, really enjoyed that, found a lot of perspective. I'm sure that will be useful for both clients, listeners, and coaches alike. As we move into part 2, we're going to dive into a few different questions. First one's going to be what the main challenges he finds his clients face and how he helps them to overcome those. And I'm sure many of you will be able to resonate with some of those same challenges as well. And then we'll also dive into, he recently really started coaching and mentoring other coaches, because it's very clear when you look at Matt's Instagram, you look at the way he conducts himself in his business, that he's very switched on the business side of things as well. So he started helping other coaches do the same. So we asked him which areas he feels that coaches need the most help with when it comes to setting up a successful online business. So for the coaches out there listening to this, you will definitely want to tune in and listen to that. And then we also get into this concept that Matt is really starting to popularize, which is this idea of winning the first battle every day, which is this idea of kind of getting up and making sure that you make that initial first decision and you get your day off to the right start. And there's, of course, a bunch of different ways you can do that. Find out what his is, and find out also how you can maximize your productivity each and every day. And then we finish off, of course, with the good old usual quick fire round. So you'll not want to miss this next episode. It's very entertaining, and Matt doesn't hold back anything on that part 2. As far as updates, guys, we've had a lot of comments and direct messages around things we can do to improve the podcast, improve your listener experience. One of those things being the sound quality, which we're 100% aware of. It's been very potentially different from episode to episode. Sometimes we do with headphones in, other times we do it without. We've now we've got a podcast mic on the way. So once we start implementing that, it'd be great to get your feedback on the difference in the sound quality, because I can imagine it's going to be quite significant. So we're looking forward to that. Other than that, guys, the best way you can support us moving forward with these podcasts, of course, if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, give us a 5-star review. If you're listening on any of your other preferred podcast platforms, the best way you can support us, because you can't often write reviews on places like Spotify, or Stitcher. So the best way to support us then is to, when you listen to the episode, take a screenshot and share it in your direct messages and tag @BetterBodyCollective. That's everything for now, guys. We look forward to seeing you in part 2 with Coach Matt.